Hey, good morning, guys. So it's about 5:30 in the morning, and it's still dark out, so I apologize for that. Hopefully, you can see me a little bit. But I wanted to come to you and make this video this morning while I was up thinking about it. And the video topic this morning is called. It's actually a part of the new hcbs Home Community-Based Services settings rule that is coming out, and it's supposed to be implemented by March. I think March 1st of 2022. So we're coming up really close on that time frame here, and what I want to focus on today in this video is going to be the differences between community inclusion versus just hanging out in the community. The state of Indiana has done a really great job. The Family and Social Services Administration, BDDS, Bureau of Developmental Disabilities, has actually done a terrific job of identifying this as one of the areas that we can apply to the settings rule, the federal law. So community inclusion versus just hanging out in the community. Now there are a lot of facets to this. There are a lot of ideas to this that I have, but we're going to focus on a couple of themes this morning. And so in order to be included in the community, I think it's safe to say that you need social skills. And knowing what we know about autism and developmental disability, we can see that being included in the community can be a challenge for someone with autism or developmental disability or even intellectual disability. So we wanted to eliminate those challenges and stuff like that. And I'm just going to give you a personal story, my story about community inclusion versus community hanging out in the community. And I'm sure there are many similar stories to that, like mine. And so for me, okay, so like one of the issues that I have is problem behavior, what we would typically refer to as problem behavior. So in order to be included in your community, I think it's safe to say we would all understand that like you kind of want to eliminate problem behaviors because in my experience, and I'm sure in your experiences with your kiddos or with people that you work with, problem behavior, we could quickly identify that as a barrier to community inclusion or community engagement. So I kind of think of community inclusion, just for reference, community inclusion and community engagement to me are kind of like the same idea. So I kind of interchange the two a little bit when I talk. So I hope you guys can follow me on that and relate to me on that issue. So community engagement or community inclusion. My problem behavior is I'm very black and white. So I'm a black and white person, and I think of, unfortunately, like with social relationships, I realize that there are hundreds of thousands of steps involved in social relationships. The problem is I'm very black and white, and I can only interpret 2 steps. So it's very hard for me. So just gonna explain my problem behavior to you guys a little bit. My problem behavior is that for me, a social relationship, step 1 is hi, how are you? And then step 2 is can I touch you? And I know we're getting into like, this is the sexual behavior part of autism, and stuff like that, which is an entirely different subject for a different video. But like, so that's obviously, if you're step 2, in a social relationship is can I touch you? That's problem behavior. Because nowhere in no social environment, no setting, no context is can I touch you an appropriate step 2. Now, just for funny, just for a laugh here, I like to keep things a little bit humorous and a little bit light. But now, in the context of step 2 being can I touch you, the only environment that I can think of that might possibly come off okay-ish, and it's still not great, but okay-ish, is an environment where the person you're asking, the woman you're asking to touch, is kind of like drunk or drinking. And then, that's kind of humorous, but it's also kind of serious and kind of like we don't want to do that because because if you're doing that then, and say you do get her to say yes, you're totally like taking advantage of her because she's drinking. And so we don't want, I try and avoid that. I try to avoid that situation, avoid that environment as much as I can, because I don't want to take advantage of anyone who is, not at their full capacity, and kind of like in a socially naive place, like kind of like brings them down to my level a little bit, right? Because I'm on the spectrum, I'm on Asperger's. So when they're drinking, it kind of like makes their social filter go away a little bit too, and kind of like brings them down to my level. And so you don't want to be taking advantage of someone when they are not at full capacity socially. And so, but yeah, So obviously we've identified here that problem behavior, if your step 2 is, can I touch you? That's problem behavior. Now, community inclusion, I would argue with you that in order to be included in the community, you cannot be going around and asking people in your community if you can touch them verbally. That's not something that we can do. And you're going to be excluded from the community if you're doing that, right? So what I've found is, in my experience with autism, is that it really doesn't matter who you are. Like if you're going around asking people, if your step 2 is, can I touch you? For example, I play trombone, and I could be in like this community band, and I could play trombone for the community band or a church band, a church ensemble, or I could play trombone anywhere. But if I'm socializing with people and women in the band, and my step 2 is, can I touch you? How long am I going to be in that band? How long am I going to be a member of that band if my step 2 is, can I touch you? So because my step 2 is, can I touch you? Community inclusion is kind of going out the window, because you're getting excluded from the community or the group that you're in as soon as you go to that step 2, and ask them to touch them. And so it's very important that we understand this concept. So we have to identify problem behavior, and then we have to address problem behavior and work on replacement behavior. And that's very, 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 very important with autism. So just as a little bit of a kind of like, I just want to use this as an example. I want to alliterate that it doesn't matter, how good your services are, or how good your staff is, or how good, for example, it doesn't matter how good PAC services are. It doesn't matter how good recreational services are if you've got problem behavior where your step 2 is, can I touch you? So like you could have the best recreational therapist or the best DSP doing your PAC services, but if they're not addressing the problem behavior, you're going to have a very hard time achieving community inclusion. So if they're not addressing like replacement behaviors or learning social steps to building a relationship so that your step 2 is replaced by something more appropriate than can I touch you, you're going to have a very, very, very difficult time achieving community inclusion or community engagement. And so we have to start looking at problem behavior as getting in the way of community engagement or community inclusion. And I've had some pretty good PAC therapists or DSPs doing PAC services, and I've had some good recreational therapists. I've liked all my therapists. It's just that we've never dove into the underlying issue, the problem behavior, and address that issue. So I think it's important that when we look at, there's a, it's a fundamental issue within the treatment plan, within the execution of services. So it starts out with your case management plan, which there's a name for that. I can't think of the name right now. It's IPS or individualized something in Indiana. IPSA, I'm not sure what it's called, but it's the case management plan. But the very important thing is we often put goals in that plan, right? So I think sometimes we don't think of a goal. We think of a goal as like acquiring a skill or like gaining skills, which is great. Like we have to gain skills and we have to acquire skills. But I really am a firm believer in the fact that we have to also have goals of identifying problem behavior and eliminating problem behavior, and replacing it with more appropriate behavior. So for me, when I'm working with a case manager, for me, it's very important that in my case management plan, that we have identified that Travis has problem behavior with step 2 in social relationships. So we need to identify that Travis is going around asking people, his step 2 and getting to know someone is, can I touch you? And we need to identify that in the case management plan, because I really feel like if that's not identified within the realm of the case management plan, it's going to be very hard for the other staff on my team, my behavior analyst, my PAC staff, DSP, my recreational therapist, whoever is working with me. It's going to be very hard for them to help me if they are not made aware of what my problem behavior is, and that we should be addressing that as the number one goal of my treatment plan. So I think it's very, 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 very important that in the realm of case management plan, that we are identifying the problem behavior and replacing it with more appropriate socially appropriate behavior. So we really have to look at how do we teach the social steps in building a social relationship to where, we have to work on the gray area. I would contest to you that being able to process gray concepts is actually a very important part of community inclusion. Because if you're black and white, you're all or nothing. So it's like, hi, how are you? Or can I touch you? Think about this. Like, you're not going to have quality relationships. You're not going to have quality friendships. Because like nobody's going to want to get to know someone who is just going around asking people if they can, asking if you can touch someone. So that's a barrier to community inclusion. It's a barrier to building social relationships, and it can be identified as, because it's a barrier to those two things, it's really a barrier to my quality of life. I'm not going to have a decent quality of life or a great quality of life if I am black and white and not understanding great concepts and not basically what I'm saying is, if my step 2 is always, can I touch you? Because that's going to prevent me from building quality relationships. I'm not going to have good quality of life. I'm not going to be included in the community. I'm not going to be engaged in my community. And it really just does not matter who I am. I could want to be like I said, I could be a trombone player in an orchestra. I could want to be a preacher. I could want to be, I could want to be anything. I could want to be a doctor. I could want to be a lawyer. I could want to be, a factory worker. But there's no social environment. There's no job. Okay. There's no job to where, it would be okay for me to have step 2 as, can I touch you? So there's no job that I would succeed in when my step 2 is, can I touch you? And so you quickly see, because this carries across, this is a problem behavior in all social contexts and all social environments, you quickly see that this problem behavior not only prevents me from being included in my community, but also prevents me from keeping a job, from being in a college educational environment, and all sorts of things. So it really interferes with my quality of life, because I'm not able to do anything but sit in my room and basically do nothing all day long, and stuff like that. So it's kind of frustrating, because in your head, I can logically sit here and explain this problem to you, but I don't know how to change my own behavior, change my own thinking, or learn the steps that are different, replacement behaviors. I can't teach myself step 2 through 787 and stuff like that. And so I'm really frustrated, but I know that I'm making people uncomfortable. So because I know that I'm making people uncomfortable, I kind of just sit in my room and do nothing and don't even try to be engaged in my community, because I don't want to make people uncomfortable. So my quality of life isn't very good, because I'm a very black and white thinker, and my step 2 is, can I touch you? And that's just not sustainable for a good quality of life. So yeah, I think that we have to, and so then it becomes an issue of, again, we want support staff to make sure they're focusing on community inclusion instead of just hanging out in the community. So people will tell me, I'll get pack staff and we'll go play card games or go to a movie or, go to the zoo and hang out and just have fun, which is great. And I'll be asking for advice on how do you get to know someone? And unfortunately, a lot of people just aren't sure of how do we help someone with this issue. So a lot of times I'm told to just be yourself and be who you are. Well, I will tell you in my experience, if part of who you are is just being black and white and having step 2 as, can I touch you? There is no social environment, no social context where that is going to be okay for you to just be who you are. So I need to learn, social skills are a part of who you are, right? So I don't think it's unfair to say that Travis needs to learn social skills to develop his personality and help him, be able to communicate who he is with other people. So I think that it's very important that we as a society, that's supporting people with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, mental illness, start to look at community inclusion versus just hanging out in the community. So like I said, I have rec staff, and they would like to take me to play basketball or take me to play tennis. And we're working on the function of having fun and playing tennis with the staff or playing basketball with the staff. And that's great because it gives me something to do. It helps me, like, it gets me out into the community, but it's not focused on helping Travis learn the social steps he needs to develop social relationships so that he can be an active and engaged member and be included in the community. And so I think that, you know, like I always say, it's very important that and guys, the social stuff, you know this, you support people with autism, you have kids with autism, you know, the social stuff is so complex, right? So like, you always want to ask for permission before you touch someone. But unfortunately, neurotypical people do that in a nonverbal way versus in a verbal way. So I just kind of want to, like, you know, we're kind of going down a more in-depth detail here of social relationships. But what happens is like there's no instance to where I don't know of any instances where a neurotypical relationship to where the guy asks the woman for permission verbally to touch her. And so, like, it's kind of like, in my understanding of social relationships, of romantic relationships, it's kind of like this nonverbal communication going on. So, like, you might be able, like, the guy, I think what happens is, like, the guy can kind of read the girl. And so he kind of knows when she's into him. And because he knows that she's into her, he decides to kind of, like, test the water, right? So, like, he might go in for the first kiss. Or he might reach for her hand to hold her hand. And just, like, test out the water and see how she responds to it. And so, like, he's not necessarily verbally asking her, can I hold your hand? Or can I give you a kiss? He's kind of like reading her, and oh, she might be into that because I think she's responding this way to how I'm interacting with her. And so he kind of goes in and he kind of tests the water. And then he's like seeing and feeling out her response to what he's doing. And then as she's responding, she's communicating to him non-verbally that, oh, this is okay, or, oh, I'm not okay with this. We need to back up a little bit and go back to the previous step, and things like that. And so, like, I think guys do ask for permission. You always have to ask a woman for permission to touch her. You need her consent. You need her permission. But it's kind of like a nonverbal dance, right? So it's very inappropriate for me to verbally come out and ask a woman, can I touch your whatever? Or can I hold your hand? Or can I kiss you? Because society, we just don't do that in our society. And even like when you're progressing, right? So it's all about testing the waters. My understanding is, you know, that it's all about testing the water. So like, even as you are building a romantic relationship, say you're kissing, and we would consider that, like, I know like a lot of people refer to this as like baseball analogies. So like we would consider like, okay, we're kissing. So, you know, like we're on first base. Now you might be kissing for 10 or 20 minutes, and decide that as a guy, you might be ready to go to like second base. And, you know, we don't have to talk about what the bases are because you guys kind of know all that. And that's something I have to learn, obviously. I have to really understand. But, like, neurotypical people kind of understand what all that is, so I don't have to go into detail. But basically what I'm saying is, like, as you're kissing her on the lips or however you're kissing her, like, you might decide you want to go to second base and go a little bit further. And so the guy doesn't necessarily come to her and say, you know, like, he doesn't actually verbally come out and say, can I put my hand on your breast? Or can I put my hand up your shirt? Like, he doesn't ask her verbally. And that's what blows my mind. Like, right? Like, he doesn't verbally ask her for permission to proceed to that next step. He kind of like decides that, okay, she's comfortable kissing. So I would like to test the water and see if she might be comfortable with my hand on her breast or with my hand up her shirt. And so he kind of just goes for it. And then he's like looking at her nonverbal reaction, facial expressions, the nonverbal communication. Is she pulling away? Is she like grabbing his hand and stopping him? But it's a nonverbal question. He's making a nonverbal gesture, and she's responding in a nonverbal way. You know, she might even slap the guy or whatever. That's a nonverbal communication, right? So, but like, he's testing out the water nonverbally. and like seeing if she's ready to go to the second base. So each progression between the bases, first base, second base, third base, home run, he's not necessarily verbally asking her for permission to steal the base. Now, I love like analogies, so I'm going to refer to baseball. Like basically, the idea is he's trying, I think, and again, I might understand social relationships very wrong, and this might be a very bad social analogy, but when he's on first base and they're kissing, and he wants to go to putting his hand on her breast or trying to get to second base, like he doesn't necessarily ask for permission to steal second base verbally. He's asking non-verbally, but basically what my interpretation of that is kind of like he's trying to steal second base without the catcher throwing him out stealing, right? So like she then becomes the catcher, and she's either gonna like let him steal the base without making an attempt to throw him out, or she's gonna throw him out, and he's gonna be caught stealing, and then he's gonna have to be he's gonna go back to first base or even be thrown out of the game completely or thrown out completely. So it's very fascinating to me that it's very fascinating to me that people think of romantic relationships as like baseball, and it actually is a good analogy. Like it helps me understand it a little bit better. But so like I would argue and contest to you then that part of social communication, obviously you know this, but like 93% of social communication is nonverbal. So especially when it comes to romantic relationships, there's a lot of nonverbal communication going on. So I would also contest to you that being able to facilitate and develop romantic relationships is a part of community inclusion and community engagement. And so I would argue that, in order to help someone feel included in the community, we kind of need to help facilitate and develop social and romantic relationships with them and help them develop those relationships so that they can get to know people and really feel included within the realm of the community. Obviously any problem behavior. So like we want to eliminate like stalking behaviors, because stalking behavior is going to prevent you from being included in the community, and things like that. And so we really have to start looking at when we're designing services, when we are designing a treatment plan, when we're developing a treatment plan, we really have to start, coming at it with the perspective of, it's not just about taking this person and helping them hang out in the community, but we actually have to teach them skill sets that help them be productive and members of the community and contribute to the community. Because if I don't have the social skills to build a social relationship, or if my social skills are so, for lack of a better word, underdeveloped, that I am offending people by asking them to touch them or skipping steps, I'm not going to be able to be engaged in my community. I'm not going to be able to be included in my community, and I'm not going to be able to be, a productive member of society just because I am skipping steps and coming on too strong. I might have stalking behaviors. I might have, I'm going to be offending someone. I'm going to be, yada, yada, yada. So like things like that. Now, just a little bit more kind of about my experience with community engagement and community involvement is, so I, long story short, basically learned that with coming on too strong, and I just had a lot of girls in high school and college tell me, like if you pay me, you can touch me. I've always had many women tell me that. So like that's kind of like been my avenue to get to step 2 is if you pay me, you can go to step 2. Now obviously, like we talked about earlier, my step 2 is the wrong step 2. So I don't necessarily believe that if I had the proper step 2 in my brain that like I would have to pay to go to step 2. But like many women tell me that I have to pay to go to step 2 because of what I believe or my brain thinks that step 2 is. And so the problem then becomes a really problem within the community and community involvement and community engagement, because I now have to learn how to discriminate, an ABA term, but discrimination. So I now have to learn how to discriminate. And I because the problem is, yeah, many girls would tell me that you have to pay in order to touch, and like would reinforce like, oh, well, you can touch if you pay me. However, not all girls are like that. So there are some women who would like actually like to be paid to let you touch them. And in my experience, and I've met some of those women, but then there are many more women who wouldn't want to be paid to let you touch them. And so it becomes a tricky environment to navigate within the community, because you then have to discriminate, well, which girl wants to be paid for touching or intimacy and which girl doesn't want to be paid for touching or intimacy. Because like if you just start asking every girl, can we hang out if I pay you $500? Or like, if you just assume that every girl wants to be paid to let you touch her or move to step 2 or go to second base or first base, then we've got problems, because there are women who will actually be completely offended by the fact that you want to pay them to go to step 2 or to move to second base. Because like they will, like woman, like not a decent woman doesn't want to be paid and isn't going to let you move to step 2. It's never going to be okay to have touch as step 2 with a decent woman, and she's not even going to want to be paid for it because she's not a whore, or like that's what, lack of a better word, that's what I get told a lot by girls. Like they're not, like they I think that like for lack of a better way of explaining this, that when you offer to pay them to go to step 2 or to touch, they feel like it makes them feel like you think that they're a whore or like a prostitute or like a sex worker. And so like then it becomes a problem. It's very tricky for someone with autism, right? Because then you have to like be able to discriminate. Okay, this girl probably wants me to pay her to ask her to go to step 2. But then it's like, well, this girl over here would be completely offended if you offer to pay her to go to step 2. And then, so that you have to be able to tell in reading people, you have to be able to tell like which woman wants me to pay her to go to step 2 and which woman doesn't want me to pay her to ask to go to step 2, and stuff like that. Now, let's not forget that step 2 for me, asking to touch, is always going to be inappropriate. So like there's no instance to where you're ever gonna, without offering money, I've learned, there's no instance to where it's ever going to be okay to ask to touch as step 2 in a social relationship without money. So like it's never going to be okay if I'm not offering money, which I'm trying not to do. Like if you don't offer money, it's never going to be okay to have step 2 is, can I touch you? Because you really need to get to know someone and develop a social relationship with them and connect with them before you begin asking them for permission to touch, right? So I think that, again, I can't stress enough to you about, I'm talking about settings rule here. I know this is a stretch, and I know we're thinking outside the box, but we really have to start thinking about, man, in order to be engaged in the community, in order to be a contributing member to society, in order to be included within your community, you kind of really need to know how to develop appropriate social relationships. That's kind of a big thing. And so I think that, as part of the settings rule, we have to start looking at how do we facilitate teaching social relationships instead of just focusing in on like, are we taking them out into the community? And are we teaching them adaptive living skills? So like we might be focused in on teaching them how to shop at Walmart or teaching them how to take cooking classes. But like, I will argue and contest to you that no, it does not matter. In my experience with autism, I'm 36 years old now. And in my experience with autism, it's not going to matter what we do if we don't address the problem behavior and replace it with more appropriate behaviors and work on running more steps to building a social relationship. Work on more steps to building a social relationship so that we can ask people non-verbally for permission to advance in the relationship. without coming out and asking them verbally. So I think it's extremely important that we kind of like, for people, certain people on the spectrum, not all people, but for certain people that are more maybe like high functioning, struggling with more advanced social concepts, we have to use the settings rule. We have to learn to use the settings rule to help them in their lives and develop their quality of life, help them live their best life, and help them develop, amazing relationships so that they can be active and productive members of their communities. And I really think that I'm a firm believer in the fact that, because of my experience, like, people will give you all sorts of ideas when you're on the spectrum. Like, well, you just need to try this, or you just need to do this, or you just need to do that. But here's my thing. If you're sending out an email, for example, dating websites. If you're on a dating website and you're sending out an email, "Hi, how are you? I'm Travis. I really like to get to know you. I was wondering if we could hang out, and if I could, like," and then in that first email you're saying, like, you're like, "Can we hang out?" And then you're like, "I'd like to cuddle with you," or "Can I touch you?" Okay, so you're skipping steps within that first email or two, and you're asking them to touch them within that first email or two. You can replace the environment, right? So say that doesn't work on Match.com. So you might say, oh, okay, that didn't go over well on Match.com. So now let's try eHarmony. So then we go to eHarmony and we try the same exact thing. Well, obviously you guys know, well, that doesn't work on eHarmony either. So then we try Plenty of Fish, or Tinder. And guys, even on the, it's fascinating to me, because even on these dating sites that are more hookup oriented and cultured, still step 2, as asking to touch on step 2, is completely inappropriate and will push people away, scare people away, and will not be successful. So you can give me, a number of different websites to try, a number of different dating sites to try, and replace the environment. But like we said earlier, there is no social environment where it's appropriate to have step 2 be, "Can I touch you?" And so even, we get into, like, a lot of people will tell you to try, like, special needs dating websites or autism specific dating websites, which is, like, those are really great sites and it's a terrific idea. But still, on those sites, it's never going to be okay to approach a woman as a man and say, "Hi, how are you? I'm Travis. I'd really like to get to know you. I think you're pretty." And then say, "Can I touch you? Can we cuddle?" Like, and skip steps. Like, it's never going to come off as appropriate. And so even online, you're going to get rejected, and you're not going to be able to develop a social relationship on online dating because you're skipping those steps and, pushing her away and scaring her away. And so, let's talk about online community engagement. There's very few online communities that you're going to be able to engage with if your step 2 is always, "Can I touch you?" And so, just like I've been saying, is like you've really got to look at, for community engagement and community inclusion, we have to look at social skills, and we have to look at how do we develop social relationships, and things like that. So basically, the overall concept, I guess, of what I'm trying to explain to you here today is I would like to see us use the settings rule to be able to really focus in on building appropriate and healthy social relationships. Because to me, that is key to community engagement, to community involvement. And it's key to being able to shift the focus from just hanging out in the community to community inclusion. So I can't stress to you enough. I think part of the problem I've experienced in my services is because we've danced around the problem behavior, people on staff are just not comfortable addressing that problem behavior. People will just tell you, like, they'd rather just tell you, "Oh, just be who you are. Relationships are based off of who you are. Just be who you are, and everything will be okay." Unfortunately, it kind of feels like, what's that word I'm looking for? When somebody when you have this problem behavior that is so problematic, like that, like asking to touch on step 2, that's a huge problem behavior. And when someone approaches you, a professional who's there to help you, approaches you and just says, "Well, Travis, just be who you are," you're not only kind of like reinforcing the problem behavior, because unfortunately that's a part of who you are at the time, But you are also kind of like what's the word? Infantilizing? Infantilizing, whatever that word is. I can't think of the word right now. But basically, you're making my problems out to be less than what they are. And it's kind of like it's frustrating because you're making the problem out to be less than what it is. And you know, you're not really addressing the underlying issue. So like we can't, for community inclusion, for me, we can't just dance around, you know, the problem behavior. We have to really jump into the problem behavior, eliminate the problem behavior and replace it with more appropriate behaviors, and work on steps to building more healthy and appropriate social relationships. So that's kind of my spiel on community inclusion and community engagement. I'm super excited that the state of Indiana is recognizing that we have to move from focusing just on getting people to hang out in the community to moving over to, you know, community and inclusion and community engagement. And so I can't stress you enough how lately, you know, I'm super impressed with the leadership here in the state of Indiana at FSSA. With DDRS, there's some really great leadership in place right now, and they're listening and they're hearing us. And, you know, so I think we're seeing some positive changes, and I think that, you know, overall we're making some great progress. And so I just want to thank the people of leadership at the state of Indiana, and just applaud them for their efforts. And so I want to thank you guys for tuning into this video this morning. I think that I love making videos, and I hope that you guys enjoy them. But I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks again for watching, and have a good day.